Hello my dear students, welcome back to online English classes. This is Jagdish. As we all know, reading is an extraordinary and a fascinating activity that begins at a very young age. People read for different purposes. Some people have the habit of reading just to pass the time. Some people read for enjoyment. They really enjoy reading it. And some other people read for different exams like competitive exams and academic exams. Students like you read for examination purpose, and some other students they read because reading is their habit. So some people have the habit of reading and some people read just to pass the time. Whatever, reading is an extraordinary activity that enhances our mind and enriches our knowledge. It enhances our brain. So when it comes to the activity of reading, people read newspapers, stories, novels, short stories, plays and poetry. However, when you read any of these stories, plays, novels or poems, understanding of the same is very much important. You have to comprehend, you have to grasp whatever you have read. Reading comprehension is the ability to process the text and understand its meaning. At PUC level, you should be able to read and understand both prose as well as poetry. Therefore, the reading activity or reading comprehension has been a part of your syllabus. It has been a part of scholastic studies. Many a time, the questions related to prose comprehension or poetry comprehension will be given in competitive exams as part of testing the candidates' reading skills as well as the candidates' ability to read and understand the given text or given context. So, whatever, some of the fundamental skills are required in an efficient reading comprehension, like knowing the meaning of words and ability to understand the meaning of word in a discourse context, ability to identify the main idea of the given prose or poem, identifying the major thought of that particular given context, and ability to understand the situational mood and ability to answer the questions related to that particular prose or poem, and finally ability to catch hold the poet's intent or his objective or his mood or poet's point of view. So the ability to understand the poet's intent or the writer's opinion is very important when it comes to the reading activity. So when you read a text, when you read a prose or when you read a poem, understanding of the same is very important, is very significant. It is very much important, it is very much essential to understand, analyze the given text or a poem. So in your second PUC English language syllabus, you have two types of reading comprehension. One, prose comprehension, and the other one is poetry comprehension. Today I am here to discuss poetry comprehension. So all of us are very familiar to poetry comprehension because we have been reading poetry right from our school days. Even today we read, we study and we enjoy poetry in our college syllabus, in our academic syllabus. As you all know, poetry comprehension will be based on poems. The purpose of this poetry comprehension activity is to check the ability of students to understand poem, poetic qualities, poetic terms and to enjoy it to some extent. Yes, whenever we read poems, whenever we go through poetry, we really enjoy reading it. So it is also a kind of ability of readers to enjoy the poetry. So that is the main purpose of poetry. So poems will always be filled with strong feelings and emotions. Whenever the reader reads it, the reader should also feel just as the writer, just as the poet. So whenever you read a poem, whenever you see a poem, what is the first thing that you notice? In a poem, what is the first thing that you notice? Is that structure? Whenever we see a poem, the first thing that comes to our mind is structure. We notice the structure of that particular poem. Whenever we talk about the structure, the very first thing that we notice or that comes to our mind is stanza. Yes, structure basically can be talked about in terms of stanzas. So stanzas are a group of lines in a poem that are separated by a space in between. In a poem, you could have any number of stanzas. So the first thing that comes to our mind when we talk about structure is stanzas. Stanza is a basic structure of all the poems. So apart from the structure of a poem, there are different forms of poetry. So you have narrative poems, you have descriptive poems and lyrical poems. So apart from the structure, you have different forms of poetry, different forms of poems. You have narrative poems, descriptive poems and lyrical poems. So when we talk about narrative poems, a narrative poem is more like a story. It is more like a story. And when it comes to descriptive poems, a descriptive poem reveals the world of an individual. These descriptive poems reveal or describes the world around the poet or world of an individual. In lyrical poems, a single speaker will talk about very strong feelings and emotions. So these lyrical poems express very strong feelings and emotions of an individual. So you have different forms of poems here: narrative, descriptive and lyrical poems. So apart from these forms of poems, a poem can also be an ode. A poem can also be an ode or an elegy or a ballad. It can be a ballad or a sonnet, an epic poem. So you have these three forms of poetry. Apart from this, a poem can also be an ode. So ode is a kind of lyrical poem, and an elegy is a song, a mourning song that talks about a person who is dead. So these elegies are written about the people who are dead. So the best example for an elegy that I can give you is John Milton's On Shakespeare. And a ballad is a long lyrical poem that can be sung. And a sonnet, as we all know, a sonnet is a 14 lines poem. So as we all know, an epic poem or an epic song can also be a lengthy one, a long poem that talks about the adventures or the achievements of a hero. These epics are written in a celebratory tone. They celebrate the achievements or the success of a hero. So these are also the different forms of poetry: ode, elegy, ballad, sonnet and epic. So let us now talk about how the questions related to this poetry comprehension will be asked in your examination. So dear students, as I have already told you, the purpose of this reading comprehension is to develop simple comprehension skills in students. So that is the main reason for prescribing this reading comprehension as part of your syllabus. So from your examination point of view, they don't give you an entire poem, a whole poem to read and answer the questions related to that particular poem. Instead, they'll give you one of the stanzas from a particular poem or a few lines from a particular poem, so that you should be able to read and answer the questions related to that particular poem. And this question related to poetry comprehension carries 3 marks in your second PUC annual examination. As I have already told you, in your English language syllabus, you have two types of reading comprehension. One is prose comprehension and another one is poetry comprehension. So prose comprehension carries 10 marks in your examination, and this poetry comprehension that we are talking today carries 3 marks in your examination. So a particular stanza of a poem will be given to you, or a few lines from a poem will be given, so that you should be able to read a particular stanza which is given to you, followed by 3 questions related to that particular stanza given in your question paper. So if you just read and comprehend that particular stanza and answer those 3 questions, you will be awarded 3 marks. So this poetry comprehension has 3 marks in your examination. So for the better understanding of this concept, this topic, let's see a few examples. So dear students, I am here discussing this topic with a few model questions. On my right side of the board, I have written a few lines from a poem. On my left side of the board, you have 3 questions formed based on this particular poem. And you should know this question related to poetry comprehension is 25th question in your annual English paper. So it is 25th question, and the question will be asked like, read the following lines and answer the questions on it. And this is for 3 marks. So let us read the poem first and answer the questions set on this particular poem. Let's read this. Oh blithe newcomer, I have heard, I hear thee and rejoice. O cuckoo, shall I call thee a bird, or but a wandering voice? These lines have been taken from William Wordsworth's poem, The Cuckoo. And one more thing I should tell you is, poems or the passage that is given for your examination will be an unseen one. Unseen passages, unseen poems will be given to you, and you should be able to read and understand the given text and answer the questions set on a particular prose or poem. So please keep it in your mind, the poems or the passages given in your examination will be unseen passages or unseen poems. So let us now understand this poem. Here, oh blithe newcomer, I have heard. In the first line you have the letter I, which refers to the poet. Who is the speaker here? Speaker is the poet himself. So he says, oh blithe. Blithe is nothing but happy. The newcomer who have arrived is very happy. So, oh blithe newcomer, I have heard. I refers to the poet. So the poet has already heard the voice of this newcomer. And I hear thee. Thee here means you. I hear you. I hear thee and rejoice. Rejoice is nothing but filled with happiness, filled with joy. The soothing sound, soothing voice of this newcomer. So who is the newcomer? He says, oh cuckoo, shall I call thee bird? Here again, thee, you. So he asks, oh cuckoo. Cuckoo is a bird. Oh cuckoo, shall I call thee? Shall I call you a bird? So here you should observe that the poet has used the capital B for the word bird. So which means the poet is naming that particular bird. Shall I call thee a bird? Shall I call you just a bird? Or but a wandering voice? Wandering voice, wandering, roaming around. Shall I call thee a bird, or shall I call you a wandering voice? So the phrase wandering voice refers to the sound which can be heard everywhere. So wherever you go, you will hear the voice of this bird cuckoo. So he asks that bird, shall I call you a bird or a wandering voice? Because wherever he goes, the poet goes, he hears. So shall I call you a wandering voice? So these 4 lines have been taken from the poem Cuckoo, which is written by Wordsworth. But you should know, many a time the poem that is given in your examination will be an unseen one. They can give any poem of any poet. So you can't expect that only this particular poem will be given in your examination. They can give any poem of any poet. So let's now see the questions set on this particular poem. So what is the first question? Who is the newcomer addressed by the speaker? See here, "O blithe newcomer, I have heard. I hear thee, I hear you and rejoice. Your voice is filled with joy." And who is that newcomer? He says, "Cuckoo, oh cuckoo, shall I call you a bird?" Here the cuckoo is the newcomer. So that the answer is cuckoo. So cuckoo is the newcomer. And next question, how does the speaker feel on hearing the song? So how does the poet feel when he hears the voice of this cuckoo? And he says, "I hear thee and rejoice." In the second line of this stanza, he says, "I hear thee, I hear you and rejoice." Rejoice filled with happiness. So the answer is he feels extremely happy. He feels extremely happy. So this is the answer for the second question. So next, what is the other phrase the speaker uses to refer to the bird? So here, what is the other phrase? Here they have asked what is the other phrase, not the word. So let's read once again. "O blithe newcomer, I have heard. I hear thee and rejoice. O cuckoo, shall I call thee bird?" So here you have the word bird. Shall I call you a bird? So here what is the question? What is the other phrase the speaker uses to refer to the bird? So he has two options. The poet has two options. One is bird. He can call that cuckoo as a bird, and the other one is or but a wandering voice. He also asked that cuckoo, "Shall I call you a bird or a wandering voice?" So what is the answer here? The phrase wandering voice. So the phrase wandering voice is the other phrase the poet uses to refer to the bird here. So if you just answer these simple questions set on the given particular poem, you will get 3 marks in your examination. So let's see one more example like this. Let's read this poem and answer the questions set on this particular poem now. So let me read this poem. "A little fairy comes at night. Her eyes are blue, her hair is brown, with silver spots upon her wings, and from the noon she flutters down." So how beautiful poem is this? Let's read the questions first. So 3 questions have been given. When does a little fairy come? Whose eyes are blue in color? Where can you notice silver spots? Very easy questions have been asked on this particular stanza. So first question, when does a little fairy come? When does she come? In the very first line you have the answer. A little fairy comes at night. So what's the answer for the first question? So little fairy comes. A little fairy comes at night. A little fairy comes at night. The second one, whose eyes are blue in color? Here, a fairy comes at night, her eyes are blue. So here the word her refers to this fairy. So whose eyes are blue in color? Now you can say fairy's eyes are blue in color. So the answer is fairy's eyes are blue in color. Fairy's eyes are blue in color. The next question is, where can you notice silver spots? So here in the third line of this poem you have the answer. A little fairy comes at night, her eyes are blue, her hair is brown, with silver spots upon her wings, and from the noon she flutters down. So the answer for the third question is the silver spots upon her wings. So where can you notice the silver spots? Upon fairies wings. So upon fairies wings you can notice the silver spots. So like this, the questions related to this topic, poetry comprehension, will be given in your examination. You should be able to read the given poem or few lines from a particular poem and answer the questions set on the given poem. If you just answer correctly, you will get 3 marks. So I hope you have understood, you have followed how to answer for this question related to poetry comprehension. So there are some 15 poems have been given in your 2nd PUC English workbook. I'll suggest every one of you to read those poems and answer the questions. For some poems you have questions and for some other poems you don't have any questions. I'll suggest every one of you to read those poems and frame the questions on your own and answer the questions. So I'll end my session here. I hope you have followed. Thank you.